Ready to get started?
Yeah.
All right. Me too. Excited for tonight. Thanks for joining us for tonight's event. I'm Michael, the event host at RJ Julia. We're joined by Karen Pinchin and Bill Sisson to discuss Karen's book, Kings of Their Own Ocean. After a brief introduction, very brief, we'll hear from Karen and Bill. We'll have a period for questions from our audience. So we're glad that you all came tonight. After the event, Karen will be signing copies of her book, Kings of Their Own Oceans. We have some copies available at the register right here, top of the stairs. We also have copies of Bill's book, which I think Bill will be able to sign as well. A copy here, yeah.
Seasons of the Striper.
Seasons of the Striper, yeah. Karen Pinchin is a veteran journalist and graduate of Columbia's journalism school, focused on science journalism, and she's recipient of the school's Linton Fellowship for Book Writing. Most recently, she was the Tao, thank you, fellow at PBS Frontline, also notably a culinary school graduate. Her work has appeared in Vox, Huffington Post, The Globe, The Mail, National Geographic, Modern Farmer, Newsweek International, and The Deep, among others. She lives and fishes in Halifax, Nova Scotia, with her husband and son, Bill Sisson. Sisson.
Either.
Yes. He's been chasing striped bass much of his lifetime, from Nova Scotia down to Chesapeake Bay, probably even beyond that, I imagine. Yeah.
Like the ranch.
Yeah. He's worked for fishing magazines for nearly 40 years and founded Angler's Journal in 2014. Seasons of the Striper, pursuing the great American game fish. Info, and we have that available here also. Here to tell us more about their work, their adventures, and hopefully more about themselves. Karen Pinchin and Bill Sisson.
Well, I think we're in for a real treat tonight about Karen's new book, which focuses on bluefin tuna, which really is one of the most spectacular fish in the ocean, and also about the people whose lives are touched and shaped by that fish. And what I really liked about Karen's book is the way she blended the science with the fish and wove through the little machinations of fisheries management, the biology, and really the flesh and blood characters who that fish touched in lots of ways, from Nova Scotia to the Mediterranean and further. So it's a very interesting book, well written, clearly focused, and it's an incredible fish. So with that, I can turn it over to Karen. I was going to start with a simple question. That was, how did you get started in dream business? And then how did you get turned on for this particular story? Because Bluefin has been written about a lot, but you've done a really interesting way to come into it, start with a person and really get over what's going on.
I can do the first slide.
Yes.
Okay,
There we go.
intersperse it. So I've been reporting on the ocean and science for a while. Also, first of all, thank you for coming. It is such a pleasure to actually see people in person when you're writing a book. You're basically just locked in your basement. So it's really, really such a pleasure and a joy to be here. Thank you to RJ Julia and Bill for great hosts. So as you'll read in the book, both my parents were scientists. I think my dad wished I was had been born a boy, and I grew up, learning how to catch fish, gut fish. Those are some of my earliest memories. Are out on the water with my father, and so it was always an interest. But they never really took journalism seriously. It felt like by going into writing, I was kind of leaving my family behind. And as I went to culinary school and I ended up working with some beautiful fish from the West Coast, and gorgeous salmon, you get to see how tasty and beautiful these fish are. And it was like I could feel the arc of my career kind of pulling me in this direction. Eventually I moved to Fredericton, New Brunswick, which north of north. There you go. There you go. If you're a salmon fisherman, you will know where it is. And I was doing some reporting there, and I started asking some questions. Why can we find local seafood in this place? And that kind of tipped me into this journey. I started reporting on American eel, another enigmatic fish, another very confusing, mysterious life cycle. And when I went to do my master's at Columbia, I got into this fabulous book writing class. But when I pitched the idea of the American eel, the professor said, absolutely not. Nobody wants to read a book about eel. And so that was when, as I recount in the book, I was walking down Broadway with my husband and son, and I got a call from a root and tuna scientist, and she said, you wouldn't believe what we found. And yeah, and that kind of tipped me into, and so this picture was actually taken for, I don't know if it was actually used in Angler's journal, but this was taken by Michael Savoli. It's a root and tuna sporting phenomenon they call flashing. It's similar to what octopi do with their chromatophores under their skin. Like when they're dying, the cells will actually change color. And so this is actually what it looked like as it was dying when it had been caught off the coast of Prince Island. Next slide.
And I think those striations inside were clear marks.
Yeah. And so that when I discovered Molly Lefkovich, she was the scientist who reached out to me. That was the first night I went into the computer lab. I typed, she said, oh, it was tagged by this guy named Al Anderson, but really the story is about me. And I searched Al Anderson and I came across a blog post that was a response to his obituary in kind of the New England fishing scene. And some people were like, absolute legend, rest in peace, Cap, so glad I got out on the water with you. And then some of the people said, if he was on the water, you knew he was there and he was going to affect your day. And you kind of got that feedback. And so my dad had recently passed away. I kind of detailed this in the prologue. And I kind of glommed on to Al in a way that I didn't even understand why or how it was happening at the time. And this is him here with some striped bass, the likes of which I don't think we may ever see again. What do you say?
May not be able to keep them.
Yeah. Hopefully they're out there somewhere. Yeah. Do you ever want to go somewhere else?
I knew Al, because in 1969, I was a sophomore in high school and Al was my high school biology teacher. And we wound up being friends for 50 years afterwards, but I can tell you this, Al didn't have any trouble with classroom management. He was the captain of the classroom, the same way he was captain of the prowl. He was a tough, smart, articulate, sometimes volatile guy, but got us both fishing with him, and what I liked about it is you could talk about anything because he knew about the Laurentide ice sheet and how how the recessional moraines form the islands, and he could talk about the geology, he could talk about the biology, he could tell you why the fish saw what they saw, which ones could see color, which ones saw shades, and it was just an interesting guy. So we would fish almost, not every spring, but we often fish in the spring in a place off Block Island called the North Rip, or the north end of the island.
It was the king there.
And he would take me and some other people out when he was waiting for the fish to show up with clients. So we were like these guinea pigs. So we would be out there fishing, and if there were no fish yet, he wouldn't have the clients come. When we got to fish, then the clients would start fishing. The North Rip is like where his ashes were spread as well.
Yeah. And actually, if you look on there's like a GPS marker on the marine GPS that actually says that that's where Al's ashes are, because Daryl, his nephew, I guess, was able to input the data. So when you're passing the rip, you'll see that this is where Al Anderson's ashes.
I ran into one of my high school classmates when I was doing my book, because he was a fisherman then, he's a fisherman now. And he reminded me, he said, remember what Al used to say? He said, no, what did he say? He said, Sisson get your head out of the bass and put your head more in the books, you'll be a lot better off.
Want to know one, you know, going into his university classes. 20 minutes late in waiters, he'll drop a bag of trout and like in the sink and just hang out squeaking in his waders until the class is over, and then he goes to the sink and guts those fish in the sink. Can you imagine? Yeah, and this was the thing about Al, I think from the very early moment, there's something, even that photo on the left and the right, there's something in his face and his body language. Something, I just had a spidey sense that there was kind of something operatic about him. And I think I picked bluefin tuna for the same reason I picked Al, is that writing about the ocean, writing about the systems and how we get food and the origin of human life in North America, like it's just all these big ideas. You need something to hitch them to have it make sense for the reader. It could be a nice book to read, right? Like David Grann, like all these narrative nonfiction writers I grew up idolizing. It's like, how do you write a book like that? You need something as compelling as bluefin tuna. You need someone as complex as Al, you know?
He's as complex as a fish in a lot of ways. He started a fishing club in high school. We all sort of joined, and we'd go cod fishing on Cox's Ledge and that was kind of interesting. And you know, he was obsessed about tagging. That was the best way to put it. He tagged more fish than anyone
Next slide, please.
in the world. I think he tagged roughly 60,000. They're mostly striped bass and bluefin tuna. And I think he tagged like 44,000 striped bass. I was there for some of them. He used to be
The high school was where?
in Westerly High School.
What?
He lived in Buckner. I'll tell you this, I knew he was a fisherman then, and I knew he was a charter guy, so we used to get a very ornery biology teacher on Monday mornings after come in from those late night charters.
They change its clothes and then roll into the high school and spend a bunch of time with a bunch of high school students. Like nobody wants to do that. So here, I have a picture on the left. This is his very first striped bass tag that he put into a striped bass, if you do it with a tagging stick, or you know, and it lodges the tag under the spoon. And the idea is that these fish then go back into the water, they survive, they grow, they move around, and by recapturing these fish, you get data points that tell you about the health of the stock. And so Al, this is the very first recapture. And so, and even the way that this letter existed in his basement, you know, it's in a plastic folder, it had the badge there, it had the tag, everything was just so big. It speaks to a sense of pride, an accomplishment, and him trying to kind of put a pin in history. You know, I was here, I tagged this fish. There's some kind of compulsion to me in how this was all kind of laid out. On the right, that is Al Anderson and what is possibly potentially Amelia, the fish that I read about in this book. And the reason we have this photograph is because Al kept such immaculate records of his day book, his daily records of being out on the water. Everything I write in this book is not, it's factual, it has factual basis. There's no kind of creative liberties taken. That's Jason Williams. And Jason Williams is currently in this room at the back row wearing a ball cap. And so the phone number that was in Al's day planner was the landline in his mother's house. And it was still working when I called this phone number. And what a miracle. What a miracle. Al, and so and I think Jason sent me this as a PDF initially, this photograph.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah. And when the instant I still remember getting, I think I had like full chills for like the whole evening. I felt that it was almost spooky. Like at this point, the story kind of picked me up and I was just kind of medium or something, you know?
Yeah.
It was very much meant to be.
He's very meticulous in the tagging,
Mhm.
in the records, and many with the knife, and there's a fish now, so we have to tag another one, can't we just fit lines?
Can you actually talk to people who might not be familiar with like, what is taking a fish from kind of beginning to end?
So the fish we tagged were what we called the all spaghetti tags at the time. They're from the American Littoral Society in New Jersey. And you get a fish up on deck, you lay it down, unhook it quickly, you put a wet damp rag over its head to keep it calm. Then you had this little tag and put it in like a steel, it would fit inside a little steel bar, and you just kind of thread it behind the dorsal fin, pull it out, and do kind of an overhand knot over it. And that was it. And back in the water. You want to run fast because, you know, the more time out of the water, the greater the mortality rate of the fish. So, and if you couldn't get the hook out, come on, what are you doing back there? Let's get going. I was used to Al, and I used to handling a lot of fish, so it wasn't a problem. But somebody seen him,
Mhm.
and then he'd let him go. And at the end of the night, he'd every tag. You know, every tag card you fill out and mail it to the Littoral Society. And then when there was a tag return to the New Jersey nonprofit, they would notify Al, and then Al would notify the angler and so on and so
Mhm. And I guess in terms of moving the chronology forward, then when Al started getting the bluefin tuna, because I think there's this like itch for tuna, right? In a lot of anglers, you know, there's something about the size and speed and the mystery of them. But
Wow.
yeah, exactly. And so he connected with a scientist in Woods Hole named Craig Mather, who kind of had this fancy scientific pedigree. But when you think about it, he was just a guy who got paid to do what he liked to do, which is catch fish, right? But Al saw, I think, a kind of scientific perspectability in his association with Frank. I think he really liked the idea that he wasn't just a high school biology teacher and charter captain, that what he was doing kind of had this bigger meaning. You can go to the next slide. But the extremely sad thing was that when I don't know, for any writers in the room, when I discovered Al Anderson, he had died just a few months before I came across him. And there's this feeling you get of, well, like, how am I going to tell this story? This guy's not with us anymore, you know? And that's a real reporting challenge. And so then it's like, well, how do I reconstruct this man's life in a way that's respectful to his widow? I reached out to his widow. I called her, I emailed her, crickets. Until I sat down with a sheet of loose leaf and I basically said, you know, I'm Karen, I'm from Canada. Can I let me tell you a story about my father and my fishing and why I think Al's life is really important. And I mailed it to her. And a month later, she called me back and said, you know, come to Rhode Island, you know, come meet me. We'll have a talk. And she got all of his kind of best mates together, his first mates on the boat. And it was just me and these 4 grown men sobbing at this table. And, you know, at that point, I didn't have a book deal, nothing was happening, but there was this house full of memorabilia, you know, there was just something that said, and so this is a picture from me in Wedgeport in 2021. Wedgeport, Nova Scotia, one of the scenes in the book where it was the boom of these international tuna tournaments. People came from the world. You had Amelia Earhart, FDR, Ernest Hemingway. They all came to this little podunk town in coastal Nova Scotia. I don't know if you've ever, Portland, Maine, there's a cat that kind of goes over that body of water. It goes to Yarmouth. And these are these guys who've been, you know, the bluefin disappeared. Now they're coming back. That fish is going to get, you know, sold to Japan for, you know, it's going to be shipped overnight. Basically from the airport. Yeah, exactly.
Sushi certainly played the popularity of sushi played a big role in the tuna fishery, and played a big role in the prices that were occurring in the docks, and played a big role in the management of the fisheries. There's a lot of pressure on the ICAP, International Biomanagement, to do this way or that way. So maybe you can talk a little bit about the sushi craze and what that.
Yeah, I if we have any veteran fishermen in the room, anglers, you know, the stories you hear about the 70s, you know, it went from being something you very, you know, taking it past the breakwater and dump it because it was worthless. You know, this fish had no value. In Wedgeport, they called it horse mackerel. You know, it's just like they hated them because they would break the nets. You know, they didn't want these fish around. And then with the rise of the popularity in Japan of red fleshed meat for sushi fish, it was just, and this is this incredible thing with, you know, just one person at the right moment in history. You have I told the story of an employee for Japanese Airlines who was like, well, we have all these big airplanes coming from Japan full of VCRs, radios, but they're going back to Japan empty. And so we need to fill it with something that can justify the cost of taking this thing all the way back to Japan in an airplane. And someone had the idea of filling them with tuna. And so, you know, they ended up having to recruit two brothers who built coffins, literal coffins, and they filled them with ice and they ran some experiments. And in the book, and do you remember what it was like being these fish being landed at the dock at that time? I'd love to hear kind of your recollections.
I was up in Boston when the Reverend Son Young Moons moved into the port and tried to, and did start tuna fishing. And the Gloucester waterfront was, you know, full of picketers, and the mayor, what's his name, Albert?
Leo, yeah.
Leo. He was a big blustery guy, and he was, "Oh, you know, the Moonies are here, and there are signs of Moonies." And I was a pretty young reporter, so it was a good story, and I liked fishing then. So I was talking with the fishermen, and then we talked with the members of the church, and I think it came back with fair stories about it, but it was really, you know, a lot of name calling, a lot of signs. Some fires were started. There were punches thrown at people. It was just, you know, it was the Unification Church, the so-called Moonies coming in, and not only were they worried about, I think, their sons and daughters running off, church members, but they were worried about them catching all the tuna and selling them directly to Japan.
Yeah, and this is one of these incredible moments where, so one of the sources in the book was a man named Alan Hansen, and he is a character. He's still alive. He lives in South Korea with his wife, who was match made with him. He participated in that mass wedding at Madison Square Gardens. They were he's still happily married. Yeah, he's still happily married. Lives in South Korea. He's a book writer. Well, he had self-published a book that had not gotten any press. It was basically like all about how great the Reverend Moon is as the second savior or whatever. So there's that part of it. But he agreed to be interviewed, and there's pictures of him and the Reverend Moon in both. And he, you know, if he had not been commercial fishing in Alaska, if he hadn't been in Germany where he was recruited by some pretty girls, you know, and kind of traveled around with them, and then he came back to the States, and the Reverend Moon basically said, you know, who of you knows how to fish? Three guys put up their hand who had been in the Navy. He was the only one who had ever caught fish before. And so the Reverend Moon, you know, they get a boat, they get the tuna chair, they go out on the water, and they don't get a fish for like a really long time. And there's like gasoline, but they figured out how to catch this fish. And then the Reverend Moon is like, we're gonna dominate American fish. And even today, the sushi you will eat at your sushi restaurants, about 80% of it is supplied by companies that are associated with True World Foods, which is a unification affiliated business. So if you are eating sushi, you are likely buying it from a business associated with the Unification Church. So,
And their boats are still on it. Fished out the one a couple of winters ago. Some guy has a big striped bass fisherman fishes New Jersey and the Chesapeake Bay, and he was on a one world. I said, "Oh, that's Moon's boats, right?" He said, "No, I found out it is." They were good little fiberglass boats, and they would fish in Massachusetts Bay, so they didn't need much of a boat. So they made these small 25-ish, 26, 27-foot center houses somewhere, I think, in New York, right?
yes, New Jersey. I think it's now New Jersey.
Yeah.
So, yeah. And they realize that they're not going to be able to integrate socially. So instead they decide to basically go to fisherman's wallets. And they said, well, these guys have fixed the price at about $1, under $1. Let's offer them $1, $3. Let's offer them $1.50. Let's offer them $2. And with a fish that size, you can send your kid to university with a couple of those. So, next.
I looked at some of the prices.
Yeah.
The record $1.76 million bluefin at Tokyo Fish Market, I think.
Yeah, so I have a picture. Good timing. We're designing this up, Bill. This is a picture of 1/10 of the bluefin tuna that I saw at the Tuna Fish Market in Tokyo. I was reporting my thesis on American eel in Tokyo and snuck into this market because it was not yet open to the public. But yeah, I'm an investigative journalist and I can figure these things out. And it turns out having a screen cap of the Japanese characters of "Hello, I am a journalist from Canada. May I please see the bluefin tuna?" didn't work at all. Yeah, I don't know if you've ever met a Japanese security guard, but they don't need anything. But I followed in a tour group and was able to watch the auction of the bluefin tuna. And
Why
these
does
sell.
that look like the fish from?
So this is they're frozen. So these are the fish that are farmed in the Mediterranean. So they're flash frozen. This is the mouth. When they ship them, they cut the tails off. And then there's a tranche of the flesh from the back that they put on the top of it so they can gauge the quality of the meat. But these are the frozen fish. Like over here, if this is like a big room, the fresh fish are over there. And that's where you have like the auctioneers. And those are the fish that are coming from New England, from Nova Scotia. Those are like the fresh, highest quality, the fattiest fish. And like the fish that sold, I think the 1.76 was that record. It eventually hit $3 million. It hit $3 million for one fish. But it's like a public relations stunt,
But they did pay the fishermen of the docks, I can't remember, I think they got as much as 10,000.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they would have, the Japanese would be there with these coring devices and so you needed to really take care of the fish well if you were touching them on the outside, because they wanted them ice right away. But if you drag them over back and beat them up, they would work. So they would take a coring device and stick it in the fish and pull it up, and then, just like a scientist would look at core samples, they gauge the quality of the meat, and then the price was determined about the grade. So fishermen learn how to take care of the fish a lot better than they used to. Ice them.
Next slide. And then you have, on the flip side, one of the places I visited was the south of Spain. This is in Cadiz, in a town called Barbate. This is an extremely handsome Spanish man who I spent some time with. His last name is Guzman, and his friends call him Rafael Guzman. And the difference between kind of the New England and Wedgeport fisheries and this fishery is that this fishery has been operating for 3,000 years. It started with the Phoenicians. They do set nets, and the fish can go through the set nets, and they corral them into these chambers, and then they harpoon them. In the earliest days, they would actually drag them onto the beach and club them to death. I know, sorry, that's a bit Victorian. But when the Japanese started getting involved in the Mediterranean, this is when they were realizing, oh, we can't just, cut them with knives. That's when they started using these mupara, they're essentially gun cartridges at the end of long poles. And they send scuba divers down to go in with the fish. And they'll just, it's actually very humane. The fish don't know it's coming. It's a single shot to the head. And then they do a procedure called ikijimi that is from Japan, where they put a very narrow rod down the spinal column, and it prevents any kind of lactic acid from burning the meat. And then it goes, right onto, a Chinese or a Japanese trawler that's stationed just offshore. Once that trawler is filled up, it's gonna, for the reaper, I guess, it's gonna go along the chain.
And then how long are they for them being in fish though?
That's.
Well, you're gonna have to buy a book, I guess, and find out.
Some goes to
It's a bit of a thriller, it's a murder mystery.
But anything has that kind of price. on it.
Both of those books are very fun.
Next slide. And then you get what is essentially now like sushi that you can get in any store, right? And so this, I ended up going to Madrid where Amelia, the fish, who was caught in one of these sediment. So Al tagged her in 2004. The scientist who I talked to, Molly Luckevich, re-tagged her in 2007. That tag was eventually found in the south of Portugal by a scientist. They thought it was a parasite flushed in the germ. That tag that Molly put in after she put in the tag. And this, you know, this challenge with this type of kind of citizen science is that that's a lot of burden on the final end moment for someone who's busy and stressed to say, here's this weird piece of plastic that says National Marine Fisheries Service, please call this number. But, you know, the scientists, the population has been at risk in some places for so long, you know, people take it seriously. And that's how they kind of went into the tuna network. That's how Molly found out about it. That's how I found out. And so, you know, what are all the chances that all these things would line up?
This fortune was found by scientists, because I know there's a lot of anti-government feelings among the commercial sectors always getting regulated. So, you know, they caught attacks, fish attack, back of them. It was rare that they would turn them in this shelf there. You know, cutting their own livelihood if they send them.
Which is weirdly ironic because the more tanks you get, it proves that there's more health of the species. You just have more data points to a certain point. I guess if you're catching too many fish over and over, then it means there's probably not a lot of fish left.
I was just wondering, when they put them on the boat and from Spain, you said they go by boat to China? How do
Yeah.
they keep them? They just freeze them and have them?
So in the case of the big frozen fish that you saw, they would be flash frozen on the boat and then just like pile up. In the case of the fresh fish, they get taken from the boat. It was incredible to watch, because they said it could only be an hour from the boat, and then the boat backs up directly to the facility. And there's like this orchestra of people, the fish come in, the tail gets off, they take off, they quarter it, and then it gets, you know, some gets kept fresh and they do it in quarters. So a lot of it depends on the quality of the fish, who's paying the money. It's like that's when like the wheels of globalization, capitalism kind of engage there.
Probably a stupid question, but that ship's going through the Mediterranean from the Nile, right?
It is going out the Mediterranean,
Going all the way around.
yeah, all the way around, all the way around, months and months and months. And the cool thing for journalists is that you can actually see these boats. I don't know if anyone has the marine tracker on their phone.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's amazing. And so for reporting purposes, I was able to say like, this is a Chinese flag that, so it's a reefer ship. They call it reefer. It's basically just,
Refrigeration too.
yeah, it's a giant refrigerated vessel.
You can track any ship in the ocean, basically.
Yeah,
Oh, I didn't know. Something new.
extremely cool. Okay, you can do the next slide. Want to talk about maximum sustainable yield, Bill?
you know, better you than me. But it's a highly regulated section. It's regulated as like this one stock, two stock theories, and there's an imposition by that. Karen has written a lot about this acronym, this ICAD. So I don't think I keyed it up too well, but it's very political.
Yeah.
And whether you had one stock you're managing, one in the West Atlantic, one in the Eastern, or whether it's two stocks, made a big difference. And you could set the rules and the fish were going to be protected. And it's the only moratorium I've ever heard of in the state bank.
Because it was for science. This is the incredible thing.
Monitoring.
For monitoring. And so all the fish that they were catching in the 80s, this is when Al really started getting into his tagging. He was saying, well, if this fish is in trouble, like, shouldn't we have more data? And this is what makes him such a weird character in this book is that all the other fishermen would be like, you're an idiot. You know, why are you catching these fish and letting them go? But at that point, he had worked up enough of a base of anglers who wanted to go out with him and catch fish with him. And some of the like the story of Jason and his brother and father, you know, it was like fish after fish after fish after fish after fish after fish after fish. That's how good, you know, Al, you know, he might yell at you and make you feel badly about yourself. Wow. But he knew how to catch those fish, you know, that he had a trick. One of his mates told, or I think it was Zach, someone told me about this, where he would hit the throttle and the boat would kind of go fast and then slow again. And it would kind of jerk the rods. And it was like every single rod kind of juvenile movement on it. It was like pop, 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 pop. And they sometimes would have like 5, 6, 7, 8 fish on once. But
He was a very good fisher. And bluefins, they have amazing eyesight. They're one of the smaller ones are easy to catch, but the big ones could get really difficult. And if, like in Massachusetts Bay, when there were movies fishing with plastic people, the fish, their eyesight is really good. And they used to have these thinner and thinner meters and ropes because they have incredible eyesight and what they use.
if you're an angler, I hope you read this section and appreciate it about how he did his own line. How he kind of did the different colors of line, he would tie them all together. You know, a lot of fishermen would get their rods, the line put on for them. He did them all himself in his basement. But one thing I did want to touch on briefly is that, you know, one of the themes of the book is, you know, do we need to pass some moral purity test in order to do meaningful work or leave a legacy? You know, that's kind of one of the themes that's kind of taking a lot of this book. But also that a lot of what we think is science is just made up. There's an idea called maximum sustainable yield in fisheries policy. This idea that, you know, and it's still used by the US government, by the Canadian government, by, you know, and that, you know, we're almost doing fish in favor. They're going to keep reproducing, they're going to keep eating their food. You know, at a certain point, they're going to run out of food. So let's just catch them right there. All those fish are extra. We can eat those fish. But it came up by this guy named Wilbert Chapman, who had been stationed in the Pacific during World War II. And he just came up with this idea. He was like, I think this makes sense. And then a scientist was like, well, I can maybe make this look good in the math. And the scientist did the math. And then the regulators were like, something we can work with, we can regulate this. And it led, like, so this picture, I tell the story of Tommy Gifford and Michael Lerner. These were bluefin tuna they caught over one weekend in Wedgeport, Nova Scotia.
They were pioneers in the dive.
Yeah, that was my favorite chapter to write. It's amazing. Yeah.
Used to push in the ocean.
Okay, next slide. Okay, and then I just wanted to kind of, we talked about the big picture here. This is Al and Daryl. That's why Daryl caught this fish. Wow. And he was so proud of her. She was violently seasick. And then he basically was like, he told the 2 guys that were in the boat with him, he was like, put her in the chair. We're kind of like, this is his poor limp wife. And, you know, but she landed that fish and it was about 10 pounds under what the tournament weight was. Yeah. And so it meant he didn't get the trophy, which was crushing for him because he always needed the trophy. This is Molly Lukovich, who in the process of writing the book, as I wrote the book, she lost her lab funding. She ended up doing, these are tuna gonads. She started doing her work out of her garage. This is Carl Safina, who you might know. He wrote the song for the Blue Ocean, landmark environmental book, led to, you know, a lot of this regulation on tuna. He caught this fish. Guess what he got for Christmas this last year? Tuna gear. That's how much this fish is recovered. And it's people like, and so this is the Reverend Moon down there. This is Alan Hansen. That's Margaret Perry, who's a filmmaker who actually documented a lot of this happening in Wedgeport. And so you have all these like extremely, like you can't even make these characters up, you know? Yeah, you can't make them up.
You know what I always like about when I read about it, it's the different kind of adaptations that have evolved with the fish to make it such a greyhound. So for speed, for eyesight, for the way they can navigate across oceans. But also maybe about,
Yeah, then that's what, it's funny when you talk to the scientists and people who are obsessed with him, a lot of them talk about Jacques Cousteau. You know, Jacques Cousteau is named here a lot, you know, there was obviously a moment where maybe kids were bored enough, you know, watching TV, and they felt transported out of their homes, you know, to wherever he was. And Molly Lekovich, that was kind of her earliest inspiration. But before Bluefin Tuna, she was obsessed with turtles, leatherback turtles. And they have a lot of the characteristics. They evolved with a lot of the same characteristics Bluefin had. Notably, the most important one, a lot of people may say Bluefin are warm-blooded. This is your chance to be a big fat know-it-all and say, no, actually they're warm-bodied. Because there's a difference. They basically have the way that birds have like a little heat pump in their legs that keep their legs from freezing in the wintertime. Fish essentially Bluefin have this in their body. So it means instead of losing the heat through their gills, it kind of recirculates through their body. And that heat leads to better eyesight. It leads to the power, so much power.
keep their body temperature above.
Exactly. Yeah. And it means they also have the pineal window, the little window in their head. It's literally like a piece of cartilage. It goes directly to the organ in their brain and allows them to sense night and day. It's why their breeding behavior is so enigmatic, because they kind of go up and down. They breed during a full moon. It's the chromatophores that we talked about, like their skin. It's just like, you know.
They have a magnetite sort of like birds, some of the birds.
Yeah, so that's a piece of the scientific literature that I found. I mentioned they may use magnets in their bones in their head to navigate. It hasn't really been proven yet. But I know exactly, yeah. But you know, gotta start somewhere.
But the really fast thing is 40 miles an hour is fascinating as well.
Yeah, and you can still go fishing for these fish. You know, they land them up in, they're still landing. The challenge is that it's not a recreational fishery, right? You need someone who's a tag. But in Canada, and I don't know, does this happen the same way where you go on a commercial boat, you pay as a.
In PEI,
Yeah.
still, it's a pretty big fishery up there. I think they get a tag for maybe 1 or 2 fish they keep a season. So, and so a lot of Americans and people from around the world go there and they look at the fish, and then they look at them outside the boat. It's big
Pose with it.
Otherwise, they release it.
Yeah.
But the tournaments they have, like up like Blossom Island and tuna tournament.
This price are smaller, so they're for yellowfin.
And
Big eye.
bluefin too, right? Oh,
Sometimes it's still catch and release in some cases. You know, you can't, if you're caught, if you have a bluefin on your boat, your tag goes into that fish, if you're a commercial fisherman. You're not allowed any more fish. There was a big scandal. An American heiress was fishing in Nova Scotia and she was riding the tuna. Did anyone hear about that? She was like, there was a picture of her. She had like gotten into the water and was like riding. This is how big these fish are. So please respect us Americans. And our fish. But sometimes it's a crime under Canadian, I think it's probably a crime in the States too, where if you catch a fish, you need to boat that fish and take that fish. You can't just drag the fish beside the boat until you catch a bigger fish or a better fish or a nicer fish. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, you can't do that. Very bad. Yeah. Next slide. And I just wanted to have a moment about how, I came up in hard news, investigative journalism. The word you're not allowed to use the word and in this type of work. And so this was ultimately, I think, the gift Al gave me, the gift you gave me, the gift Molly, Carl, and Jason, all these people, we call them characters, but really these are just people living their human lives, and I'm accessing their stories. But then so the book, as you read it now, it was pretty much written. And I sent it to my publisher and they said, something's missing. No, it's not quite there yet. And I sat down and I wrote the prologue and I wrote about my dad and I wrote about imagining what it's like to be a tuna. It sounds so outrageous, to put what it would be like to be a tuna. I'm underwater, I'm breeding in the Mediterranean, but it's been one of the most meaningful experiences in my career, and I'm sure you have this in your book as well. This is something our books have in common, right? Is to be to be present in the work, right? To have agency and to have an opinion. And, I do think that Molly Lutkovich's scientific work, I think she was bullied. I think she was ahead of her time in a lot of ways. I think, you have these people who are getting into literal fist fights, right? In these regulatory meetings. But the strange thing about bluefin is that, they say the arc of history bends towards justice is I don't always necessarily believe that, but that we're all making these individual choices and sometimes it can accumulate in a really hopeful story. And so I started this book being you should not eat bluefin. And by the end, I now eat bluefin probably once every 2 weeks. As long as it's harpooned or rod and reel, I know the fishery where it comes from. Long landing is still kind of a little controversial. Yeah. I think, where do you shop? So you can get this fish from, there's a dealership actually, so I'm going to, not a dealership, but I'm doing an event in Boston in 2 days, and there's a dealer named Wolf's Fish. They work with the bluefin anglers off the Carolinas, and they're actually going to give me a tuna collar and a cut from the head of the moreel that I write about in the book. And these bluefin are here. If you ask the chef, there is New England bluefin, but the trick is to eat it when it's in season. And so the season goes, I don't know what the season is here. Does it end in October for you guys here or earlier?
I think it's weather dependent.
Okay.
Potentially later.
Yeah.
I don't think it's yellow. December.
Okay, yeah. So in the season in Canada is April to October. And so, but then the challenge is talk to your local seafood market, because part of the challenge is building local demand for these local fish, because there's all that sweet, easy Japanese, Spanish, Chinese money, right? And so I think the onus is on us to kind of say this is a beautiful, tasty, sustainable fishery. And in Barbate, in the south of Spain, because it has this cultural lineage, they eat it there. It draws thousands of tourists a year to see this fishery, to celebrate the bluefin. We don't have that in Nova Scotia. It's not here in the same way. It's kind of that, they say that Canadians, that we were hewers of wood and bearers of water and hewers of wood. It's all this primary resource extraction. And I think maybe we can evolve beyond that. Yeah.
I remember bringing home some bluefin steaks. We had a cat named Frankie, and it's a long time ago. Like my patio. And this cat was an outdoor cat. He was a tough cat, and he liked fish. Went crazy, right?
Yeah.
It's like he was on drugs. It's not like how he was.
And then I think we have one slide left. It should be near the end. Oh, yeah. And then this photo, one of the most beautiful pieces of journalism about Captain Al, ran in Angler's Journal under the headline Wandering Marvels. It was about the tuna. And so the photographer Michael Savoli, the first photo, took this portrait of Al about a couple months. Was it a couple months or weeks before? A couple months before. And, he's this, a larger than life character, but I think we can see parts of ourselves in him, I think, for good or for ill, right? And then last slide, I think we're done. Any other questions you want to ask, or do you want to do questions?
We'll take 2 questions before we, and then if you have additional questions, we'll have the signing. Feel free to talk more.
If you've got
Yeah.
the book, I brought a stamp that an artist carved for me, based on like the ancient coins that they had in Rome, where you actually have the tuna holding up the temple. And it was so important to ancient Roman society that it literally held up the current. So I can stamp your book and I'll be happy to personalize it.
Any additional questions?
Is there an ideal size to market a book then?
Yeah, we want about 300 pounds. 300 to 400 is, you want like a nice, kind of fat, you want a nice fat, like a round fish. Getting up to 500 pounds, it just gets harder to sell and market, the price would go down relative to the making, so.
I think that $1.7 million fish is like a 390 something fish. I find a small channel.
It's really about
Everything about like this month.
Yeah.
You know, 1969 was the time I was a senior, you know, I'd walk by his office, I had long hair, then he took the thing, kind of shake this. Hi, Al. Mr. Anderson.
Yeah. And if you ever had like a kind of tortured male father figure person in your life, you know, I never had the chance to ask my dad the question of, you know, why did you struggle the way you did? And I never had the chance to ask Al that question, but I did have the chance to ask, you know, people he loved, people he hated. That was really talking to someone's enemies. Think about what your enemy would say about you if I interviewed them, you know? And yeah.
So what would they say? He seemed like such an amazing person. Is it people who didn't want him to tag them? Like who was an enemy of someone like this?
He was really mean. He could be extreme. I detail it in the book. He could be cutting and brutal, and like if you tangled lines with him, it was definitely your fault. You know, if at one point like a rod was left on the ground, it was unclear whose fault it was. And it would never be his fault. It would always be, you know, there was elements of his personality.
It usually wasn't this one, but it didn't matter.
So was he a different person on land than he was on water? It sounds like maybe he was, I saw him, he did a presentation for my club in Maine. I met him and everything, he seemed like a nice guy,
Oh, yeah.
but on the water, it sounded like he was like,
We were fishing the North River one night, and so the water comes out of, you know, the current carries the water out of deep water, then it hits a bar there, and it humps up, and it gets all turbulent, and that's a rip. And the way you fishing, you kind of crab along, and the lines trail back into the rip, and big fish. And one guy was stationary on the rip, he knew Al. Al's coming along, and they get closer and closer, with maybe, you know, from here to the books there. At one point, I'm saying, "Hey, Al, you got a bait on fire." I said, "Al, you know, we're getting pretty close to this guy. Don't worry, William." Closer and closer. Next thing I know, this guy shouting, "Hey, Al, what are you doing, Al?" It's going closer. We're here to this picture. We're back in the rip. Both folks are like really pitching now. Boom, 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 boom. I'm going, you know, I'm just gonna hold on, and you know, and finally the guy just left, you know, but he shoved him right out of the spot. It was territorial. It was his, and he wanted him to move. And he just,
no, you never been to the North River, I went to the lake, but what's fabulous.
yeah, it gets bouncy out there. I'll never forget that. It's like, Al, and then I just said, all right, let's get ready for the swim. But he was tough.
That's when Mary and I had to fight.